the Bain Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, steno-pad scribbling found to contain alien hieroglyphics that, if read, will wipe out order in the court and bring on anarchy in high places. Oh, wait, that's already happened. Plus, we conclude the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Bain Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Bain Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We have part two of a roundtable discussion this time with the editors and authors of the great new Ring of Fire alternate history anthology, Grantville Gazette 9. We are joined by Eric Flint, Walt Boyes, Joy Ward, Griffin Barber, and Jackie Britton Lopatin, so stay tuned for that. And we conclude the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Yay. Now here's the news. Hey, I want to call your attention to our very cool Bain Books Teacher's Guides by offering an ebook sale this month. Bain Teacher Guides are developed by teachers and education experts for use by homeschoolers and teachers in the classroom. All Bain Teacher Guides provide a background of the novel, a complete and comprehensive summation of the story, a vocabulary list, individual chapter summaries, focus questions, and initiating activities, and reading comprehension quizzes, thought-provoking discussion questions, and lots more. These are amazing resources, in other words, for amazing books, and they are downloadable free at bain.com/study guides. And now for July, we offer $1 off all the Bain ebooks that have a teacher guide that goes along with them. These include great books like 1632 by Eric Flint, Monster Hunter International by Larry Correia, A Beautiful Friendship by David Weber, and some great hindlines, such as The Star Beast, Farmer in the Sky, and The Rolling Stones. Stock up for education, for entertainment, or both, and check out the Bain Teacher Guides. They're a wonderful resource for everyone. And you can find the complete list of teacher guides and discount ebooks at bain.com. This is part two of a two-part discussion of Grantville Gazette 9. Part one is available on last week's podcast. I want to welcome Eric Flint, Walt Boyes, Joy Ward, Griffin Barber, and Jackie Britton Lopatin, or is it Lopatin? Lopatin to the podcast. Hello, folks.
How you doing?
Hi.
Let me talk a little bit about both of you, although I might need Jackie to fill me in on her background, or someone else too. Eric Flint, modern master of alternate history fiction, 3 million books in print. He's the author and creator of the multiple New York Times bestselling Ring of Fire series, starting with 1632, which came out in 2000, and it has, and this is where it's resulted 21 years later. He's written 6 popular novels with David Drake, the Belisarius novels, and with David Weber, he's written those Crown of Slave novels that are set in the Honorverse book. And there's a new one in process right now that's going to come out in the fall. It's going to be great. And what else we got? Eric was for many years a labor union activist, and he lives outside in the huffing, puffing East Chicago area where all the steel mills are or used to be. Walt, what's that? Still there?
They're still here. Yeah, hold on a second. I've got a spam.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Walt Boyes is the editor of the Industrial Automation Insider magazine, editor of the Grantville Gazette, which is the community electronic magazine of, I guess you would call it, of the 1632.org. I don't know what the organization's called. everybody that has to do with Eric's wonderful Ring of Fire series.
Community, it's the best term, probably.
Yeah.
Eric's Minions. Let's just go with
Eric's
that.
Minions. And along with Joy Ward.
My video isn't on.
Yeah.
Some of them are very definitely not minions.
You're not moving.
Some.
So, Joy Ward, author of a novel. She has several stories in print and magazines and anthologies, and she's the co-editor of the Grantville Gazette. She's written for many publications, including Mother Jones on the issues Commerce and Government Review. Griff Barber, he spent his youth in 4 different countries, learned 3 languages, burning all his bridges in the process, finally ending up in Northern California with a day job as a police officer in a major metropolitan department, where he lives with his lovely wife and crazy smart daughter and some animals. He is the author with Eric Flint of 1636 Mission to the Muggles or Mughals, and 1637 The Peacock Throne, which are India area before it was India based 1632 alternate history novels. There's Walt.
There we go.
Excellent.
There we go.
Excellent. So
that'll teach me to upgrade Zoom just before a meeting.
well, out now at booksellers. Yeah.
What
out
was
now
that, Eric?
Go ahead. Let me show you the book. Out now at booksellers everywhere. Here's the 3D version of Grantville Gazette.
Right, look at that. It's a book.
Yes, it's a book. You can see from all sides. Well, speaking of Jackie's story, which is called, what is this title of that? It's
The Invisible Dogs of Grantville.
Yeah, it's got it might have even invisible tigers, but no, it's about invisible dogs. I mean, it could. Who knows what they are? Tell us about this story, because it's funny, but at the same time, it's kind of a comment on the psychology of people at the time and of our day, sort of coming intersecting in a way.
Well, I'd read one book by Dana Stabenow that reminded me about the invisible dog craze that there was back in the 1980s. I first saw it at a science fiction convention with, someone, walking around a leash that had a collar at the end of it, and it looked like they were walking a dog, and they were having a good deal of fun, making it sniff people, and it was just kind of a fun bit of improv theater type of thing. And so I thought, it's like, well, what if someone found one of those invisible dog leashes up in their mother's attic? And I was like, how can, and maybe it was a character from another story that I'd sold. And I've got to admit that I have made precisely 3 fiction sales in my life, and they've all been to the Grantville Gazette. So, and so I basically,
so you probably shouldn't give up coal mining yet.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's well, mostly I'm an oral storyteller and a documentarian, and so fiction story I discovered was really hard. It's
tell us a little about, before you start talking about the story more, tell us a little bit about your background, because I didn't have a bio on you.
It's well, I'm an English major, library science minor, and I worked in the public library in the children's room for about a dozen years before I quit to homeschool my daughter. And then I made an abortive attempt to become a videographer and storyteller, and then I ended up meeting my husband, who is a master flute maker, and yeah, he's a lot of fun to brag on, and his
you're flouting him right now.
You damn straight. Oh, darn, sorry. Yes, I am. I like to brag on him. his first job out of Juilliard was with the Metropolitan Opera as third flute and piccolo player. And then he left that gig after 3 years to move to Boston to learn how to make flutes, because he had an idea that for tonal production that he wondered if that would make a difference, if giving a flute square tone holes instead of round, if that would make a difference. And so yes, I've done a nice photo documentary on his website, squareoneflutes.com. Sorry, extra plug on him. And so I've been a science fiction fan like forever. And I read one of David Carrico's books and was really impressed with one scene in particular. It really touched me, and so I dropped him an email and said it really touched me. And then we talked about the fact that my husband was a flute maker, and he figured that the musical instrument makers of the 17th century would be able to make the symphonic woodwinds no problem. And I'm married to a flute maker. I know how complicated it is. It's like, it would be a real problem. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about that. And
David writes, a lot of his stories have to do with music.
Exactly. So that the fact that my husband's a professional musician as well as the flute maker, I was kind of hoping I'd spur him to somehow include the square one flutes into the 1632 universe.
Well, they have been, at least by the
But he kind of told me that he was too busy with his projects, and so that I should try it. And about 9 months later, I finally had Squarely the Best was published in the online magazine of the Grantville Gazette. But that was a long and involved one. The whole slush program is, at one point I worked for a publishing company back, one of my first jobs out of college. And so I got my first job as an editorial assistant was reading slush. And so I'm really impressed that Eric was able to kind of outsource that to fans.
Yeah.
It's like, have them go through the slush pile first. And
well, it takes picking out the right people. That's the talent.
Yeah. I have never yet plowed through an initial slush pile.
I don't blame you.
No, I just don't want to. It's and we actually get better quality stories, I'd say, on average than a lot of places get. But a good friend of mine, a co-author of mine, Kathy Wynwood, unfortunately passed away a few years ago. She was the coordinator for the Writers of the Future contest for a number of years, and she was one who would first read the stories as they come in, and hundreds of them would come in for that contest. And oh man, she had war stories to tell. Her favorite story is the one that had a turnip as the viewpoint character.
Turnip.
Wow. Turnip. Okay.
Turnip as the viewpoint character. Yeah. And it wasn't a comedy. I mean, it wasn't like a satire or anything. It was like a serious story. So anyway, I have somehow managed to always make sure I've got a buffer between me and that. The way this works with the Gazette is that the editor, this past one, it was Walton Joy, they go through we decide which issues we're going to select from. Mm-hmm. And then they go through and read and select out a lot, about twice as many as we're going to wind up needing. And then they send a list to me, and then I read those and I make the final selection. And that's actually, in most cases, that's actually the first time I've ever read the story, because I don't, hardly because my experience editing Jim Bain's Universe magazine had some unfortunate aspects to it. And one of them was that even though he fucking knew better, Jim Bain just would not stop trying to be a backseat driver. even though he'd been an editor himself, and damn good and well, you can't do that. Publisher has to keep his nose out of the. An editor runs a magazine. That's really the way it has to work. And so I don't meddle with my editors. I just, including, I don't even read the stories until we get around to selecting the anthologies. And then I get very heavily involved in it. But how we do it.
Well, all right. So let's get back to the invisible dogs, though.
Okay. Yes.
What the heck would that come? I mean, all right. One of the things that's interesting about all the Grantville stories to me is frequently the uptimers are figuring out ways to make a living because they've been thrown back. They have no skills really for this world. And so they have to figure out, like, how the heck am I going to do this? So they start thinking about starting little companies and things like that. And sometimes they're very successful, like the girls that started the Barbie thing, etc. So what happens here up to a point? Don't give it all away, but what's the...
Okay, well, the way the boy everyone agreed that, of course, you don't want to sell the actual invisible dog leash, and
you sell
and it would be ridiculous, and it would be ridiculous to waste uptimer tech and resources and time and energy to make any of them to sell. So what the kid does is he has signs made up to put in people's windows that this house guarded by an invisible dog. And so they're for sale at the Higgins Hotel. And the kid every once in a while would come by the hotel and walk his dog along and let it sniff at the various bushes and act as if he's walking a dog. And then other people kind of looked at the whole idea, and of course it's ridiculous, but I have
but the downtimers, they know it's probably not real, but they don't know exactly what tech is working and what doesn't, right? And
right. So
that is true.
So my story actually starts out with one of the military engineer teachers at the military engineering school. He gets asked by a downtimer, it's like, why haven't you told us about these invisible dogs? And he says, like, who told you about that Grantville has invisible dogs? I have never seen them, but if we had invisible dogs, they would be a highly classified military secret. and so
that makes sense. Yeah.
Basically, this was the most fun story that I've ever written. I just went from logic to logic to logic. And so it's like, how would other people figure out ways of making money on it? Well, after the army person has said this, the downtimer kind of pointed across the way to someone is carrying a tote bag that says, "Beware the invisible dogs of Grantville," and it's got a fuzzed out picture of that's kind of a dog shape, and so people have figured out ways of piggybacking ways of making money onto the whole invisible dog craze. And so it's at one point, it's like I have an artist who's drawing pictures, doing portraits of families, but then beside the family, they'll include a picture of their invisible dog, which is kind of fuzzed out in the shape of the dog that they want to have done. Kind of like the not Terminator, the Predator movies. It's like, so you've got the picture fuzzed out, and so it was a lot of fun. And the engineering,
what a great concept. A great concept.
The engineering students get caught up in it. And I remembered from an episode of MacGyver in which he went back to visit his old engineering school. Every year they would have a particular type of contest. And I thought, well, it would make sense that the engineering schools would want to have an invisible dog contest. How to convince the the enemy that we have invisible dogs, because can you think of any better way of making the enemy combatants nervous as heck over any little, rustle in the background or anything like that? It's like, is that a dog? Are we about to be attacked?
The ultimate
And
diversionary tactic. Yeah.
and then of course the story really gets weird.
Well,
I mentioned that I used to do book talking for the library. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun, and it's absolutely ridiculous, and I just really enjoyed it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's sold.
And it's sold. It's
Yeah.
it's a great story. Well, let's talk about Eric's story, which starts the anthology, and get back to tigers, invisible or not. And it's so, what happens when they come back is that they haven't brought like, the Library of Alexandria with them or anything. They brought like the World Book and stuff like that. But they have some books, and one of those they brought back when they got thrown back in time was the Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. And so there's people at the time that Grantville is there who will be famous or might, but aren't yet. And explain sort of where Hobbes is in this.
Well, it's I should say, by the way, it was Tom Kidd's wife is the one who came up with the idea for that cover. And there's been a long running tradition of the Gazettes going back to the very first one, where I sort of play a game. Started with Jim Bain, and after he passed away, I continue it with Tom Kidd, our artist.
Tom Kidd is the artist of all the
well, except for the first like three.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for the last basically 20 years, he's done all the covers. And the game is that the artist comes up with a cover first, and then I have to write a story that explains that cover. And in this case, sometimes we cheat a little bit in the sense that, I know ahead of time what the idea is going to be. It's not a complete surprise to me. But what happened, there's a theme in the series that has cropped up a number of times, which is the really terrible position that artists and scientists of the era are put in if they're already famous in another universe. So, for instance, Rembrandt's still a young artist. Rubens is well established. He's well into his late end of his career, but Rembrandt's a new artist. So does he paint the ones that he painted in this other universe, which people can go look and find in a book, because there'll be those books in Grantville. It's something that scientists run into. And in the case of Hobbes, today what Hobbes is famous for today is as a political philosopher, and the guy who wrote Leviathan. But in his day, he was mostly considered a mathematician. That's how he viewed himself, was mostly as a mathematician. And so what happens in this story is that he's the tutor to a very wealthy young English lord, the third Earl of Devonshire. And they wind up in Grantville because they're kind of on hard times because the Earl's father was a spendthrift and ran through most of the family's money. They're still quite wealthy, but then his mother got in unpleasant relationship with the Earl of Cork, who's actually running England now. And then they went over to Paris and they got in a squabble with the new king of Paris. So they had to take it on the lamb and run to Magdeburg, and it kind of broke. But Princess Christina, who is the daughter of Emperor Gustavus Adolphus, and she's very precocious, very smart, but she's only 10 years old. And she has decided she's going to collect philosophers. because she already collected Rene Descartes in the previous issue of the Gazette. And she's real excited that Thomas Hobbes has arrived in Magdeburg. And what she wants, because she's also trying to introduce Halloween to the Germanies, because it wasn't a tradition there. And she thinks it'd be great. So she's also become a fan of Calvin and Hobbes comic books. So this all comes together in her mind, and Thomas Hobbes will be her Tiger Hobbes. And she'll go as Calvin when they go trick-or-treating together. And you could imagine the attitude that this philosopher in his late 40s has toward all this. What winds up happening, it's actually the young Earl who's the one who's actually wearing that costume, because he says, look, I'll just take care of this. But what winds up coming out of this is the development of a different way of designing very crude computers, which is basically by using electrical relays. And in order to make that work, Hobbes actually invents Boolean algebra 200 years before Boole invented it. And he's never heard of Boole, so he actually invented it from scratch. So they've decided they're going to call it Hobbesian algebra, because at least once they'll be able to give someone who was genuinely a great man in his own way, recognition for something. And that's kind of, this is a story I wrote kind of tongue in cheek. And it's not a real heavy, grim story, I'll put it mildly. And what winds up happening out of all this is the way they finance this project is by turning part of the Imperial Palace into a funhouse. It's actually modeled on a funhouse I visited as a kid in Barcelona. And Spanish fun houses, at least in the 1950s, had a very different philosophy from American, theme parks. It was like, you fall out of the roller coaster, why the hell didn't you hold on? I remember going through that fun house, and things I describe in the story were actually in the fun house. And years later, I went to Paris when I was in my 50s, and I went to the playground at the Tuileries to see if it was still the way it was. I remember a kid. Yep, the French still have a playground where kids break their legs, break their arms. They just take it for granted it's going to happen, and just the way it is. Nobody gets sued. So that's pretty much the 17th century attitude toward a funhouse. It's very much of a contact sport. Let's put it that way. I had a lot of fun writing it.
Yeah, a lot of things come together in the story, and you even have illustrations of circuits made with.
Actually, it was Rick Boatwright who designed those for me, and he sent me those circuits, and I actually got them from Rick. I didn't design them. Rick has been for many years he doesn't write very much, but he's been played an enormous role in the series in the background, doing things like this, inventing stuff, thinking stuff up.
Yeah, he helped me make my first sale to the Granville Gazette. I don't have much of a science background, and Rick, I was struggling to finish bank on it, my first story that I sold, and couldn't, and because I didn't have the MacGuffin that I needed. And Chuck Gannon heard me whining about it and asked Rick to take a look at it and tell me what I needed to. And of course, Rick was able to explain it in terms I could understand the science and the chemistry involved. So I owe my first publication to Rick, and then Peacock Throne. He helped me out with the feasibility and making sure it was realistic. The arms, weapons manufacturing, as well as the gunpowder stuff. What could happen given the circumstances there. So that was, he's real special to me.
Yeah. Well, he and Karen Offord are going to have a 1632.
They've got a new book coming out in September. It's the second of the Dr. Gribbleflot's books.
Yeah.
It's called Dr. Gribbleflot's and the Soulless Stoner. It's got a great cover.
Yeah. We're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And it's, I believe it's in ARC right now, so you can even buy it at the Bain.com website.
Mhm.
It'll be coming out in just a couple of months.
Well, what are so Walt and Joy, what are some other highlights of the quickly, please, but let's talk about them briefly of this anthology.
Well, I believe, I haven't looked at the anthologies for a while, so my memory is a little, the working other things, but.
Well, I can tell you that we have historians. We've got Tim Sayu, Robert Noxon, Griff Barber, Bjorn Hassler, Eric Kiernan, Margot Ryer, Mark Huston, Robert Waters, Philip Riviezo, Terry Howard, Tim Rush, Sarah Hayes, Mike Watson, Ivor Cooper. We have a Gribbleflot story. Yep. Terry Howard, Brad Banner, Ann Keener, Jackie Britton, Lo Patton, and another Karen Offord there, and David Carrico. So that's some of the stories in this thing. It's a massive book. It's not even.
There are a lot of stories in it.
It's not even touching on all the amazing stuff that's in the Gazette. I mean, it's just touching on. It's like the tip of an iceberg of all the great stuff.
Well, it's the best of the Gazette.
Well, and think about this, life has lots of little stories. That's what, if you look around you, there are all kinds of stories going on. And that's exactly what's going on with the Grantville Gazette. These are lots of stories of life with sort of real people, I should say, and how this weird change is affecting them. Like Jackie's story with the invisible dogs. I mean, that's something that would have just dropped off the moon at these people, but they had to deal with it. And so they did. And that's kind of the whole purpose of what we're doing, is letting people see all these wonderful small stories. Like Bjorn Hassler's story is a lovely set of letters between a husband and a wife. And it is very, very touching. So some of our stories are funny, but some of our stories are also very sweet. And some are just mean. We've got some mean people out there too.
Yeah.
One of the stories that really hooked me, and I bought it originally for the Gazette, is a story by Tim Sayu about this father who finds out from documents from Grantville that his daughter, who is 2 years old, is going to grow up to become one of the most famous poisoners and killers of history. And he's desperate to make that not happen. It was an incredible story. Tim Sayu has written some absolutely marvelous things and some really funny things too. He wrote several stories about Dag Rolving, who is a colonel in the Swedish army, and he's the guy that gets to make when Gustav Adolphus wants to do something for his daughter, he points at Dag and says, "Make it happen, you." And so it's Dag's job to, for example, go to a little town in northern Germany and tell them that they have to change their name to Narnia. Why? Because they've made a Count of Narnia and he needs a Narnia to be Count of. And
that comes out of a novel I wrote with David Weber a long time ago now. It's 15 years, called 1634, the Baltic War. And what happens is one of the central figures in that novel, Thorsten Engler, he's just a German working class stiff, but he winds up getting a military, has all kinds of stuff, and he winds up getting romantically involved with a uptime American woman. And then he winds up at the big culminating battle of the book. He winds up capturing two of the top officers of the French army. And neither of these captures is anything heroic. I mean, it's just, frankly, it's kind of blind luck on his part. But this kind of makes him famous. And his girlfriend, her name's Carolyn Platzer, has become the governess of Princess Christina, who is Gustavus Adolphus's only child, and she is going to eventually become the Empress of the United States of Europe. And if you ever read anything about her real history, she was a character. I mean, she was extremely bright, and she was something else.
Willful.
And willful, yeah. And we're picking her up at the age of 9, you know, and having this extremely bright child who, because who she is, has a lot of power in a way, is really a fun character to work with. But in any event, she pesters her father, the emperor, to give her governess's boyfriend an imperial, you know, a noble title. And so what he decides to do is he will create for the United States of Europe the same kind of, it's a type of nobility that I think the Austrians had. I've forgotten who it was, but it was kind of, you'd appoint somebody something. You know, it was essentially you become an imperial knight, essentially. So you didn't have to have the long pedigree. The emperor would basically say, you know, your account. And Christina has been reading the C.S. Lewis, and she insists he has to be the Count of Narnia. So the story that Tim wrote, when Walt told me about it, this is hysterical, is that this officer is the one who gets the assignment. Go find a town in northern Germany, not too far from Lubeck, somewhere in the area where the battle was fought, and just explain to the town folk that they are henceforth the town of Narnia.
And the response from the town folk is the title of the story. You've got to be kidding.
Well, it's kind of their reaction is a little bit. I don't know if anybody ever saw a movie. I'm blanking on the title. It's a hysterically funny movie. It's Burt Lancaster's in it, but it takes place entirely in Scotland, in a small town in Scotland, which is sitting on oil.
Called Local Hero.
Well, yes, Local Hero. And so this big oil company wants to buy it. And they send one of their young American executives, I've forgotten who plays the character, to talk people in this town into doing it. So you're expecting one of these, you know, the townsfolk, no, this is our town for generations. Of course, they're actually just great. We're all going to be rich. And the problem is there's one holdout. There's one guy, he's a beachcomber that will not sign, and they got to get everybody to sign. It's a really funny story, but to some extent, the town folk of Narnia have a bit of that reaction too. Which is,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, you could probably get a tourist trade out of that.
At least, yeah, put a lamppost up and they'll flock to us. Oh.
There are a fair number of stories in the Gazette that have, they're not exactly comedies necessarily, but they are pretty lighthearted, and they involve things like this,
Yeah.
of people thinking of things that have happened in the series and then developing them into a story.
Into something. Well, Eric, you're going to continue to support this amazing community. You're going to let them continue playing in this garden you've created.
Yeah, it'd be crazy not to. I mean, the thing you got to
You're the
understand
Count of Narnia.
about the Gazette is the Gazette is, to the best of my knowledge, I've talked to a number of people who know the history better than I did. The Gazette has been in existence as a professional magazine now for 14 years. No magazine in history has ever had that kind of a run based on a series that was not a media property. There have been a few successful, there's a magazine called The Man for Uncle for a while, and Star Wars and Star Trek will have magazines, but this is based on a pure literary property because there's never been a movie or a TV series or anything out of the 1632 series. And the magazine makes a profit. It
gives people a start.
Yeah, it gives people a start. Nothing that's happened in the 1632 series was planned ahead of time. I mean, this was not some scheme I had figured out 20 years ago. Trust me.
Even though you're a
I
communist.
originally wrote 1632, I intended it to be a standalone novel. I had no intention of turning it into a series. And then everything sort of started unfolding. We decided, let's do an anthology. And hey, that worked. And well, let's try this magazine. And that worked. And then starting a few years ago, we launched our own publishing house, Ring of Fire Press, which is now actually quite successful. And it's and all these things tend to reinforce each other. So there is as yet no sign at all that the fans of the 1632 series are fading away. It's not the biggest series in the world in the sense of the most readers, partly because it's something of a challenge because it is very complex, many different novels, and novels often read quite differently. So, it can be a challenge, and a lot of people sort of fade away after a while, just not because they don't like it, but just because I couldn't keep up with it. But I don't think any series out there has as dedicated a fan base as this one. I really don't. I mean, it's just.
It's pretty amazing. The second half of Bjorn Hassler's security novels about Newstedter's European Security Services, which is what? Came out night before last at midnight. And there's a whole thread on Baines Bar now about people who stayed up all night reading it. And there's more than two. So Eric's right. We have some seriously dedicated fans, and the tip between being a dedicated fan and actually writing for the series isn't very hard. We have had over 150 authors now who sold us their first published fiction professionally.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing community and amazing playground to play in that Eric Flint has created. And now we have 9 editions of the Grantville Gazette print edition. And this is Grantville Gazette 9. It's out now at booksellers everywhere. So Walt Boyes, Joy Ward, Griff Barber. And
let me just to plug the next book in a series that's coming out in December it's also an anthology, although it's different from that one. It's called 1637, The Coast of Chaos. And it's a themed anthology. It's kind of like a braided novel almost, where all the stories are related to each other. And it takes place in North America. I have a short novel in that book.
That's cool. Is that
that'll be the next one we have coming out. And we have right now, I think there are 6 1632 novels underway, one stage of completion or another. Griff and I are doing one of them. Walt and Griff and I are doing another one. I'm doing one with Robert Waters. I'll be doing one with Chuck Gannon, and I'm doing one with Walter Hunt, and I'm doing one with Jody Lynn Nye. So there's going to be a lot more coming
Yeah. Yeah.
over the next year or two.
Onward and upward with the arts, especially the alternate history, Ring of Fire arts. Well, thank you all so much for, especially Eric, who I didn't, let me go over the list again. Eric Flint, Walt Boyce, Joy Ward, Griffin Barber, Jackie Britton, Lo Patton, all part of the Grantville Gazette 9 anthology and involved in this wonderful 1632 community. Thank you so much for talking with us about Grantville Gazette 9 today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Inviting us.
You're welcome.
That was part 2 of a 2-part discussion of Grantville Gazette 9. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization. But the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
Afterward. A note from David Weber. It's been 25 years since I first sent a very young Commander Harrington and HMS Fearless off to Basilisk Station. I didn't expect her journey to last for a quarter century when she and I first set out, but it's been a fantastic voyage from my perspective. Way back in 1991, Jim Bain suggested that since every book I wrote seemed to spawn sequels, perhaps it would be a good idea to actually plan a series for a change. So I came up with 10 proposals for a possible series. One of them was Honor Harrington. Little did I know when I suggested that possibility that Jim had been looking for someone to write Hornblower in Space for a long time. I'd already decided that if the series worked, the inevitable comparison was going to be to Forrester's Hornblower novels, which was why Honor had the initials I'd given her. But I really wasn't prepared for how enthusiastically Jim jumped on the proposal. I wrote the first 2 novels, Basilisk Station and Honor of the Queen, back-to-back, and Jim released them about a month apart, which I think played a significant role in the series' early success. But I don't think that was the only reason it succeeded. I think it succeeded because Honor Harrington as a character speaks directly to her readers. She possesses qualities which I, and I suspect the majority of my readers, wish we, and especially our leaders, possessed. The greatest of those, of course, is that Honor Harrington takes responsibility. She takes responsibility for her own actions, yes, but it goes farther than that, because she assumes the responsibility of fixing other people's problems. Not because anyone else would have expected or demanded that she fix them. She fixes them because that's what responsible adults do. You can see that in her from her earliest iteration in Basilisk Station, when a young, tactically brilliant, unwittingly charismatic, and politically naive and inexperienced naval officer finds herself pitchforked into a political and moral minefield with which virtually every officer before her has resolutely declined to deal. It's what follows her throughout her career, and I would argue that it's what generates such unbreakable loyalty in both the people she commands and the readers who have followed her through the last 25 years. This book actually represents the culmination of 2 separate story arcs. I've explained elsewhere how the timing of the Mason alignment got pulled forward as the consequence of a couple of collaborative works with Eric Flint. That meant the originally planned ending for the story arc, beginning at Basilisk, had to be modified, because that story arc was supposed to end with Honor's death in action against Lester Tourville's fleet at the Battle of Manticore. Her death and her dying message to Queen Elizabeth, God's sake, let it end here," was supposed to bring the war with Haven to a conclusion and cap that storyline. The next major story arc was supposed to begin 25 or 30 years later, when the Mason alignment intruded into the light and Honor's children carried the torch forward, while the junior officers introduced in Shadow of Saganami provided the ship commanders under whom they and their friends served. I can't pretend I'm sorry Honor didn't die, because the character became even more important to me than I anticipated she might, and her death, however fitting and purposeful it might have been, wouldn't simply have grieved her fans. It would have grieved me as well. It did create some significant logistical problems, however, including the fact that the Solarian League was supposed to have had another couple of decades to get a clue where its technological inferiority was concerned. But I'm actually very satisfied with how the combined story arcs have ended in Uncompromising Honor. Although, of course, as anyone who's been reading the books undoubtedly understands, there is still plenty of skullduggery to come where the alignment is concerned. In fact, but that would be telling, wouldn't it? If any single poem sums up Honor Harrington's entire life, it would undoubtedly be Rudyard Kipling's If. She's grown from that earnest, determined, focused, apolitical, professional officer, the daughter of a yeoman who didn't have a clue how politics worked, and even less desire to find out how politics worked, into a great noblewoman, into a head of state in her own right on Grayson, a duchess in Manticore, commander of the Grand Alliance's primary striking force, one of her star nation's leading strategists, and the confidant, advisor, and personal friend of monarchs, presidents, and protectors. She's acquired the poise and the confidence to face the responsibilities that go with who she's become as fearlessly as she ever faced a salvo of incoming missiles. And she's still willing to make the right choice, the hard choice, regardless of the personal cost to her. She has indeed met with triumph and disaster, and treated those two impostors just the same, just as she's filled the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. I'm satisfied with where she is, with who she is, and who she intends to be going forward. She didn't die on her quarterdeck, as I'd originally intended, but like Horatio Nelson, she can say, "Thank God I have done my duty." And so, at the end of this book, I've sent her off to the honorable retirement my original plan for the series had denied her, and I'm glad it's so. She deserves it. Of course, people are already asking me if there will be additional Honor novels. I may be willing to see her in peaceful retirement. Quite a few of her readers aren't. I make no promises, but I very, very much doubt we've seen the last of Honor. I know we haven't seen the last of the Honor-verse, although I'm now at a point which lets me explore some other portions of it that I've wanted to explore for a long time. And in the course of those future explorations, I'm sure Lady Dame Honor Alexander Harrington, Duchess and Stedholder Harrington, will return to the stage. I doubt the Salamander will find herself in the heart of the furnace again. She's too senior for ship command, even for fleet command in many ways. But then again, she's also grown beyond a simple ship commander, a simple fleet CO. And whatever I may want for her in terms of peaceful retirement, it does seem unlikely she'll be able to stay there forever. As Empress Elizabeth says, the time is bound to come when her monarch, her star nation, her duty needs her once again. And if that time comes, she'll answer the call of responsibility the way she always has because, in the end, however she may have changed in the course of her journey from Basilisk to Operation Nemesis, at the core of her, she is still who she always was. She's still Honor Harrington.
This has been an Audible Studios production of Uncompromising Honor, Honor Harrington, Book 14. Written by David Weber. Performed by Allison Johnson. Executive producers Steve Feldberg and Mike Charzik. Producer Kat Lambrix. Copyright 2018 by Words of Weber, Inc. Sound recording copyright 2018 by Audible, Inc. Audible Studios is a division of Audible, Inc.
That was the concluding entry in the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the final piece in a Mobius strip-shaped picture puzzle of Saxony-Anhalt, or is it the first piece? Plus praise and gratitude for Eric Flint, Walt Boyes, Joy Ward, Griffin Barber, and Jackie Britton Lopatin, editors and authors of Grantville Gazette 9. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.